When the royal chef was abruptly dismissed without warning, no one outside the palace walls knew why. But whispers soon turned into gasps, as insiders began leaking details. Camilla had made a chilling request involving Princess Kate's food, and the chef said no. This wasn't just a culinary dispute. It was a calculated power play, and now the kitchen has become ground zero for a war threatening to poison more than just meals. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The palace had always prided itself on its discretion. Staff came and went quietly, changes were made behind closed doors, and the public was rarely offered more than a carefully curated smile. So when the most senior chef, a man who had served the royal household for over 2 decades, was suddenly removed from his post, eyebrows barely had time to raise before his name vanished from internal registers. No formal statement was made, no photos released, and the kitchen staff was warned not to discuss the incident under threat of immediate suspension. Officially, a leaked palace memo blamed the chef's dismissal on gross insubordination, a charge so uncharacteristic that even the most loyal footmen couldn't suppress their doubts. It didn't make sense. This was a man who had quietly overseen thousands of royal meals without a single complaint, and yet now he was being treated like a threat to the very institution he had so diligently served. The whispers started within the walls of Buckingham first. Someone had overheard something. One of the junior kitchen staff claimed to have seen the chef arguing in hushed but heated tones with a senior member of Camilla's personal entourage. Another had allegedly passed by the private pantry and caught only 2 words: Kate's menu. At first, it was written off as kitchen gossip, but the unease grew when staff noticed that Camilla had been taking a greater interest in daily operations, particularly in the days when King Charles was away attending private diplomatic sessions. Her influence, once limited to personal preferences and ceremonial tastes, had quietly extended into areas of palace life usually reserved for trusted stewards and household managers. Now, it was the kitchen, and more specifically, what was being served to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Insiders later confirmed that Camilla had personally summoned the chef for a private meeting. The request that followed was so out of the ordinary that it caught the chef completely off guard. He had, in the past, complied with dietary adjustments for various royals' gluten-free options, religious observances, or health-related restrictions. But this was different. The instruction was cloaked in ambiguity, delivered with a cold certainty that left no room for discussion. Camilla wanted specific alterations to Kate's food, not for medical reasons, not for preference, but for reasons that were neither explained nor justified. The chef, long known for his quiet integrity and fierce loyalty to the younger royals, reportedly declined on the spot. He viewed it as a breach of ethics, a step too far even within the complex hierarchies of the royal household. That singular act of defiance cost him everything. Within hours, his kitchen access was revoked. His belongings were packed up not by him, but by palace guards. The rest of the staff was instructed to avoid discussing his name, and even senior aides who had known him for years were left in the dark. But it wasn't just the swiftness of his removal that stunned those inside. It was the clear message it sent. Loyalty to Catherine came with consequences. Those who aligned too closely with the future queen risked becoming collateral in a silent war for power and proximity. And if the kitchen was no longer neutral ground, then the entire palace had become a chessboard. But what exactly was Camilla's demand, and why did it send a shiver down the spine of palace staff who overheard it? Camilla's command wasn't phrased like a suggestion. According to multiple staff sources, she summoned the chef privately, leaned in close, and whispered something that left him pale. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. And it targeted Kate directly. Those who worked closest to the chef knew him as a man of tradition and integrity. He'd served under 3 monarchs, watched palace scandals rise and fall, and had remained untouched by the storms around him until now. When word of his private meeting with Camilla began to leak among inner circles, it wasn't the suddenness of the summons that disturbed them. It was the chef's demeanor when he returned. Pale, tight-lipped, and visibly shaken. Days later, he confided in one of his aides that what was asked of him violated everything I've ever stood for. He wouldn't elaborate, not fully, but the fragments were enough to paint a sinister picture. The order involved altering Kate's food in a manner that bypassed established health and safety protocols. It wasn't about flavor. It was about control. For decades, royal food preparation followed strict guidelines: dishes approved, allergens noted, ingredients traced to their source. But Camilla's request went around all of it. She insisted it be carried out in secret. No documentation. No communication with the kitchen team. She wanted the dish delivered to Kate, personally, without trace or question. The chef understood what that meant: remove accountability, erase oversight, and deliver something potentially dangerous into the hands of the most watched woman in the world. To comply would have meant violating not only the trust placed in him by the royal household, but also risking Kate's well-being. He said no. Immediately. Unequivocally. And that's when everything changed. Camilla's response was cold. Chilling even. She stared at him and said, "You work for the crown, not for Catherine." It wasn't just a reprimand, it was a warning. A declaration of where his loyalty should lie, and who held the real power behind the walls of Buckingham. The chef, stunned, left the room with his fate already sealed. He hadn't just refused a culinary request, he had defied the Queen Consort in a matter she saw as hers to command. Those familiar with Camilla's rise knew this wasn't her first veiled strike against Kate. Though always composed in public, her private disdain for Kate's soaring popularity had long been whispered among staff. Kate, with her poised elegance and modern appeal, had become the jewel of the monarchy's next chapter. Camilla, still battling public skepticism over her own legacy, couldn't bear to be overshadowed. And in the shadows of royal kitchens and closed-door meetings, she had found a new weapon: subtle manipulation masked as royal protocol. The chef's refusal didn't just bruise Camilla's ego, it exposed her intent. She wasn't just testing boundaries. She was pushing them. And when her authority was questioned, her response wasn't fury, it was calculation. Because Camilla wasn't just angry. She was strategic. And her retaliation was swift and merciless. One moment the chef was preparing the Queen's luncheon. The next, his security clearance was revoked, his name removed from staff rosters, and his quarters emptied by palace guards. No warning, no goodbyes. Just a silent erasure of a loyal servant who dared to cross the Queen Consort. The palace has always handled its internal affairs with a ruthless kind of grace. But this was different. The dismissal wasn't just abrupt, it was surgical. Within 12 hours of his refusal to carry out Camilla's mysterious request, the chef was gone. Not escorted. Not retired. Erased. His kitchen ID no longer functioned. Access codes were revoked. Even his staff login on the palace intranet had vanished before dawn. Security officers arrived at his living quarters and packed his personal belongings with chilling precision. Laptops, recipe journals, private notes, everything was seized under the guise of protocol. Not even a farewell was permitted. One of the pastry chefs who had worked alongside him for nearly a decade later whispered that they were told he had left of his own accord. But no one believed it. The silence around his removal was too absolute, too practiced. The most shocking part wasn't the dismissal, it was the detachment. He had served the monarchy faithfully for over 20 years, cooking for state banquets, royal weddings, and private family holidays. Yet when he vanished, there was no statement, no tribute, no acknowledgement. Just an empty kitchen station and whispers that grew darker by the hour. Princess Kate, upon learning of his sudden departure, reportedly sent a discreet message requesting clarification. What she received was a vague, one-sentence response from palace administration: "The matter has been resolved internally." That was all. No explanation, no mention of her name. It was a bureaucratic stonewall so cold, so calculated, that even Kate, a woman trained in diplomacy and restraint, was said to be quietly unnerved. But it wasn't just the coldness that triggered alarm, it was the absence of King Charles's signature. Every royal staff dismissal requires final sign-off by the reigning monarch. And yet, when one of Kate's aides managed to discreetly view the internal dismissal record, the approval line was blank. The space reserved for Charles's authorization was left untouched. Unsigned. Instead, it bore the initials of a lesser-known deputy from Camilla's private household. A man who had no authority to enact such a decision, unless of course he was doing it under direct orders from someone who believed she could act as sovereign when the king was away. Within the palace walls, the atmosphere shifted. Tension began to simmer among the long-standing staff. Footmen avoided eye contact. Maids lowered their voices. Kitchen assistants, once warm and familial, moved like shadows. Someone even scrawled a chilling phrase on a pantry notepad before it was quickly torn down. He knew too much. No one claimed to have written it. No one asked. But everyone understood what it meant, because what began as a quiet rebellion in the kitchen was now morphing into something far more dangerous, a trail of questions, cover-ups, and secrets buried beneath porcelain plates and silver spoons. As the chef disappeared, Kate's inner circle began to suspect the truth, and what they uncovered in the kitchen records shook them to their core. Buried within the palace kitchen's routine logs were alterations, subtle, coded notations made over several weeks. Certain ingredients had been swapped, nutritional data skewed, and the only common denominator? All the changes were linked to Kate's meals. It started with an observant assistant, someone close to the princess, loyal but quiet, trained to see what others ignored. After the chef's abrupt disappearance, suspicion ran through the corridors like a draft. Something didn't sit right. Why would a man so fiercely devoted to duty, who had never once overstepped, suddenly be labeled insubordinate? The answer, it seemed, wasn't just in the politics, it was in the pantry. The assistant requested access to recent kitchen logs, not through formal channels, but through a long-trusted connection in housekeeping. What they uncovered was disturbing. Entries tied to Kate's private dietary routine bore strange inconsistencies. Meals that had been ordered as gluten-free showed traces of barley. Dishes marked as dairy light contained full cream. Nothing egregious enough to ring alarms, but everything just out of step enough to cause discomfort over time. The changes had not been requested by Kate, nor had they been authorized by her physician. Digging deeper, the assistant cross-checked handwriting patterns in the logbooks. And there it was, entries once written in the chef's flowing, familiar script had been replaced by tighter, almost mechanical penmanship. Dates were backdated, notes abbreviated. It was methodical tampering, not culinary oversight. Further investigation revealed an unsettling timeline. The edits began shortly after Camilla's now infamous closed-door meeting with select kitchen personnel. The same meeting from which the dismissed chef had emerged pale and silent. The pattern grew clearer with every page. The meals affected were not random, they coincided with Kate's most public royal appearances. Diplomatic dinners, charity galas, speeches and state visits. Appearances where stamina, clarity, and composure were essential. And yet, Kate had complained of vague fatigue, stomach discomfort, and spells of dizziness during those very weeks. Her doctor had made note of it, discreetly, but dismissed it as exhaustion. Now that theory crumbled under the weight of this new evidence. The ingredients in question weren't dangerous on their own, but combined and sustained over time, they were enough to cause inflammation, gastrointestinal distress, and mental fog. The motive? That was the most sinister part of all. It wasn't to harm Kate outright, it was to erode her strength, slowly, invisibly, to chip away at her shine in the eyes of the public, to dull her edge at the moments when she needed to outshine all others. It was sabotage dressed as seasoning, and the fingerprints, while hidden, pointed in only one direction. The assistant, trembling with what they had uncovered, brought the findings to Kate. But Kate's reaction wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. But heartbreak would soon turn to resolve. She didn't want to cause a scene. But for Kate, silence was no longer an option. Behind locked doors at Clarence House, the future Queen of England faced off with the current Queen Consort. What followed was described as one of the most chilling showdowns in royal history. There was no announcement, no grand confrontation in front of staff. Kate moved with quiet precision, requesting a private meeting under the soft label of family concern, knowing full well that the battle ahead had nothing to do with pleasantries. Clarence House, once a symbol of royal unity, became the setting for a confrontation simmering with buried rage and unspoken truths. Kate entered alone, composed but resolute, holding in her hands something more powerful than emotion evidence. Printed copies of the altered kitchen logs, cross-referenced timelines, and handwritten notes that pointed in one direction. This wasn't speculation. It was intent wrapped in protocol and signed in silence. Camilla greeted her with the same icy grace that had made her both feared and revered in court circles. Her smile, thin and practiced, never reached her eyes. As Kate laid the documents before her, the room fell into a silence so sharp it could have sliced through stone. At first, Camilla said nothing. She scanned the papers with disinterest, like one skimming a menu at a restaurant she had no intention of ordering from. Then came the denial, smooth, rehearsed, and laced with mockery. "Is this what you think of me, dear?" she asked, her voice like velvet stretched over steel. But Kate didn't flinch. She leaned in, repeating the timeline, the ingredients, the doctor's concerns. And when Camilla tried to laugh it off, Kate interrupted with one final line. "This stops now." That was when the temperature in the room dropped. Camilla's fade cracked, if only for a second. Her eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped. And her response was anything but subtle. "Be careful, dear," she said coolly. "The kitchen isn't the only place that can turn up the heat." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. One that left no doubt about how far Camilla was willing to go to protect her standing. But Kate didn't retreat. She held her ground, the fury in her silence louder than any outburst could have been. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. It was no longer about meals or staff. It was about dominance, about legacy, about who the palace truly belonged to. Hours later, Charles was informed not by Kate, but by a senior aide who had been briefed after the meeting. His reaction was as revealing as it was disappointing. He didn't intervene. He didn't inquire. He simply nodded and moved on, offering no comment, no instruction, no support. To many, it was neutrality. But to Kate, it was a betrayal in slow motion. If the king wouldn't protect the future queen, she would have to protect herself. She had walked into that room demanding accountability. She walked out with a decision. Kate left the room with more than confrontation. She left with a secret plan to reclaim control. When the king says nothing, it says everything. Charles's silence in the wake of Kate's confrontation wasn't just disappointing, it was damning. But was he complicit, or just terrified? Inside palace walls, where duty often outweighs emotion, silence has always been a weapon. But never had it felt so sharp, so unforgivable. After Kate laid bare the sabotage buried beneath menus and deception, those closest to her expected at least a gesture from the monarch. A phone call. A private word of reassurance. A sign that he understood the weight of what she had endured. Instead, Charles said nothing. No acknowledgement. No investigation. Just the kind of stillness that feels like approval dressed as detachment. For Kate, it wasn't just the absence of support, it was the confirmation that the lines had been drawn. And she was now standing alone. Whispers among royal aides painted a bleak picture. Some insisted Charles was fearful not just of scandal but of Camilla herself. The queen consort, who had weathered decades of public vitriol and emerged beside him on the throne, now held unprecedented sway. To confront her would be to jeopardize the stability he had fought so long to protect. Others speculated darker theories, that Camilla possessed leverage, secrets that could shake the monarchy if revealed. Whatever the truth, Charles chose paralysis. And with that choice, the weight of betrayal shifted fully onto Kate's shoulders. She hadn't just been left unprotected, she had been abandoned. Behind the scenes, the palace was fracturing. Advisors were split into factions. Some, loyal to tradition, begged Charles to step in to at least meet with Kate privately and restore a shred of trust. Others warned of political fallout, of public backlash if this internal drama ever reached the tabloids. But outside the velvet curtains, pressure was building. William, fiercely protective and known for his quiet fury, was reportedly incandescent. He demanded answers, demanded accountability, and made it clear that Kate's well-being was non-negotiable. But even he was met with a stifling wall of inaction. The monarchy had chosen caution over confrontation, diplomacy over decency. Camilla, ever the tactician, wasted no time capitalizing on the vacuum of leadership. Her presence at key events became more prominent. Her inner circle swelled. She spoke softly, smiled often, but made sure everyone knew where power now rested. With Charles silent, her reign, though unofficial, was undeniable. She didn't need to defend herself. His refusal to speak had already done that for her. It was an endorsement without words, a green light wrapped in royal indifference. The tension, once buried in back corridors and private chambers, now hovered over every royal engagement. Staff whispered behind trays, footmen exchanged wary glances, and longtime servants began to question their loyalties. The monarchy was no longer unified, it was rotting from within. And while the palace tried to present a united front, the staff revolt was already brewing. They were supposed to be silent, invisible, loyal. But when one of their own was cast aside for protecting the future queen, the royal kitchen staff made an impossible choice. They spoke out. And what they revealed would upend everything. Loyalty inside the palace isn't just expected, it's enforced. For decades, staffers lived by the unspoken rule: see everything, say nothing. But something had shifted after the chef's disappearance. A crack had formed in the foundation of fear. What had been a whispered injustice now festered into collective guilt. The staff had watched a man of dignity be erased overnight for refusing to betray the trust of Princess Kate. And when no one came to his defense, when even the king chose silence, it wasn't just betrayal, it was the final insult. Then came the first act of rebellion, a recording. Hidden in a servant's jacket pocket during a closed kitchen meeting, it captured a senior aide from Camilla's office issuing a warning. No questions. Orders are relayed. Follow them and you'll keep your post. The tone was sharp, the implication clear. This wasn't about food, it was about control. That recording found its way to a trusted former staffer who now worked abroad. From there, it was leaked to a foreign journalist known for exposing royal secrets. But the recording was only the beginning. Soon, an anonymous whistleblower sent excerpts of Kate's meal logs, edited versions, time-stamped and annotated, revealing how dishes had been altered without official notice. The level of precision in the tampering stunned even the journalist. This wasn't messy sabotage. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate. When combined with the chef's unexplained removal, it formed a chilling pattern. The article was held briefly for verification, but by then it was already too late. Whispers turned to posts, posts to threads, threads to viral outrage. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Headlines didn't name names, but everyone knew who the fingers pointed at. As the pressure built outside, more staff came forward. In hushed tones, they painted a picture of a kitchen ruled by fear. Orders would arrive with no source. Recipes changed overnight. Questions met with silence. Many admitted they stayed quiet out of fear for their livelihoods. But the chef's dismissal had made one thing clear: silence didn't guarantee protection. One pastry assistant described the air as thick with dread, as if every tray carried more than food, like it carried consequence. And when the story broke online, the palace's worst nightmare was realized. Social media exploded with theories, outrage, and calls for transparency. What's being hidden behind those golden gates? One headline read. Even more damning was the public's outpouring of support for Kate. She never issued a statement, but her silence was far from passive. Privately, she began to offer quiet support to the staff who had come forward, letting them know they were not alone. It was a gesture that rippled through the ranks like electricity. Within the palace, senior aides scrambled to contain the fallout. Meetings were held, reputations defended, and internal reviews promised. But the damage had been done. The staff had broken the code of silence. And in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of loyalty. With secrets unraveling and power shifting, Camilla makes a bold move to seize the narrative, and it backfires spectacularly. Determined to regain control, Camilla launched a charm offensive, but her miscalculated remarks during a televised interview fanned the flames. Instead of silencing the rumors, she ignited a firestorm. The palace had hoped that with time the whispers would die down. That silence would be enough to suffocate scandal. But as pressure mounted and support for Kate surged online, Camilla stepped forward not with contrition, but calculation. She accepted an invitation to a high-profile charity broadcast, the kind of appearance designed to reset the narrative. For 20 minutes, she played the role of benevolent queen consort, smiling, measured, carefully scripted. But then came the moment that shattered the illusion. Asked about the monarchy's future, Camilla leaned ever so slightly into the microphone and said, "It takes more than a pretty face and good posture to be ready for the crown." The words hung in the air, innocent to the untrained ear, but loaded with venom for those who knew the storm beneath the surface. And social media knew. Instantly. Within minutes, the internet erupted. Hashtags like #NotSoSilentQueen and #WeStandWithKate trended across platforms in multiple countries. Royal watchers, influencers, and everyday supporters dissected every syllable, every smirk, every calculated pause. The implication was crystal clear. Camilla had thrown a veiled dagger at Kate's character. But rather than strengthen her own standing, the move exposed her bitterness. What was intended as subtle undermining became a public relations catastrophe. The palace communications team scrambled. Press officers released a vague statement attempting to downplay the comment, calling it misinterpreted and taken out of context. But the damage was irreversible. The public, already suspicious, now had confirmation of what had only been whispered. Until then, Camilla wasn't above taking swipes at her biggest internal rival. William's reaction spoke louder than any palace memo. Scheduled to attend a major conservation summit the following evening, he abruptly canceled his appearance. No reason given. No substitution arranged. Behind closed doors, insiders said his message was deliberate. He would not stand beside a monarchy that tried to dim the light of his wife. The silent protest only fueled speculation, emboldening Kate's supporters and sending Camilla's allies into panic mode. Approval ratings for the Queen Consort dipped overnight, especially among younger generations who had long viewed Kate as the future of a modern monarchy. Editorials shifted tone. Coverage grew critical. A new narrative was taking root, one that positioned Camilla not as a resilient survivor, but as a bitter monarch clinging to relevance. Inside the palace, the fallout was immediate. Crisis meetings dragged into the night. Communications staff drafted and redrafted public responses that never saw the light of day. Camilla, once untouchable, was now a liability. Her influence, though still formidable, began to fracture under the weight of her own misstep. And as aides scrambled to patch the cracks, all eyes quietly turned to Kate not as the wounded, but as the one who had remained silent. Poised. Controlled. Ready. With the world watching and the monarchy fracturing from within, the Queen Consort's influence begins to wane just as Kate prepares for her next silent strike. From target to tactician, Kate emerged stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous. She didn't need to shout to win. Her resilience became her rebellion. And in the ruins of a poisoned palace, she's rewriting the rules one move at a time. In the aftermath of public fallout and private betrayal, Kate chose a different path. Not confrontation. Not spectacle. Control. She began strengthening ties with palace staff who had long felt overlooked. Quietly listening, remembering names, acknowledging loyalty where it had once been exploited. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Decisions that once passed through layers of intermediaries now came directly to her desk. Schedules were adjusted. Oversight tightened. Long-standing routines were re-examined with a calm precision that signaled change without ever announcing it. Where others had ruled through fear or distance, Kate ruled through presence. And the staff noticed. Trust, once fractured, began to rebuild around her. Outside the palace walls, something else was happening. Private charities Kate had supported for years, organizations she had uplifted without fanfare, began speaking out. Carefully. Respectfully. But firmly. They praised her integrity, her strength, her unwavering commitment to people rather than power. Each statement added weight to a growing narrative. Kate was not just enduring the storm, she was rising through it. Public support surged, not in loud declarations but in steady belief. Meanwhile, Camilla's circle grew smaller. Invitations thinned. Allies hesitated. And Charles, caught between loyalty and legacy, was forced into the role of mediator, patching fractures he had once ignored. The balance of influence had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Then came the quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The chef, the man erased without explanation, was reinstated into another royal residence under a different title. No announcement. No apology. Just a silent correction. Those inside understood what it meant. An admission without words. a concession without accountability. And to Kate, it was enough. She didn't need public vindication. She needed the truth recorded. And that's when whispers began of something more deliberate taking shape behind closed doors. A dossier, notes, timelines, names. Incidents cataloged not for revenge, but for memory, for leverage, for protection. Because Kate had learned the palace's oldest lesson, power favors those who prepare. She moved forward with grace sharpened by experience, kindness informed by caution, forgiveness, yes, but never forgetfulness. The wounds she carried were no longer weaknesses. They were warnings. And as the palace settled into an uneasy calm, one truth lingered in every corridor and whispered exchange. She forgave, but she didn't forget. And while the headlines may fade, the whispers inside the palace grow louder, because in the world of royalty, nothing is ever truly over. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.